Good deal. Thank you all so much. What a beautiful worship set. And we are going to bring our time in James to a close this morning. We could go on, and for such a small book, it's such a powerful book. It packs such a heavy punch, and so this morning's message can be a little heavy, and so, but it's not really intended that way. It's intended to make us think, and its intention is to help us to live a prepared life. Right? A prepared life. I make a lot of plans, right? I'm a planner. I think a lot about things that we're going to do and things that are coming up and things that I spent this past couple of days after school on Friday. We loaded up 6 freshmen and took them to FFA camp. It was really cool because most of them I had their parents. And so I got to take these kids to camp for the first time, and we spent a weekend there, the first ever Green River Region Freshman Leadership Workshop. And so, and because you're in the middle of that, and that's what's going on, that's what's happening, I spent a great deal of time on the porch up there this weekend, just in rocking chairs with other ag teachers, planning the next one, right? How can we make this better? How can we improve this? How can we do this better? What can we do to make this a better experience for them? How can we do it better? And so we're always planning and thinking, and so we make lots of plans. It's good to plan, but sometimes our plans get changed, right? Just in a moment's notice. And as a pastor, I know that more than a lot of people do. But personally, I've experienced it just like you have, right? I remember one particular morning I was supposed to take a horse judging team to a contest, and it was in August, and it was on a Saturday morning, and so we had the plan to take these kids. And so I had them, and this was back in the 1900s, right? Okay, so this was before cell phones, this was before all this stuff, so you had to actually call these people at home. And so we had a meeting plan, right, to meet at the high school at like 7 o'clock, and we were going to go there, and then we were going to go to this competition in Bowling Green. And I got up, and when I got up out of bed, I was like, I'm hurting. You know, just kind of had this pain that wouldn't really want to go away. And it's like, okay, I must have slept wrong or whatever. So I take a shower, and it's like, okay, get some hot water going. It's really not getting better. And then it started getting worse, and then it started getting worse, and then it starts hurting bad, right? And I'm like, my insides are coming out. I'm dying, right? It's rough. Something's got to give. And so all of a sudden, I'm not going to a horse judging competition anymore, right? I'm going to the hospital. And 2 hours later, I'm in a CT scan, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. I had a kidney stone attack, right? That wasn't on my card for that day, right? It was not in my personal planner. It was not in my deal. I didn't plan for that. I didn't expect that, but that's what happened, right? And so sometimes things come to us, and then boom, there we are. Life is very short and very fragile. And there's things that happen in our lives as we grow older and as we experience those things that remind us of that every single day. Right? Troy Richards is a good friend of mine. He's a pastor out at First Baptist Church in Jackson, Missouri, formerly here at East Hartford, and that's when we were in the same county for a long time. And we grew up same time. He graduated 86, I graduated 87. And so there's our paths crossed a lot. Last Sunday, we were talking on the phone, just kind of reviewing the day and looking ahead to the week and what do you got going on? What can I pray? And then he says, hang on, I got a call. And so he puts me on hold, and he grabs this other call, comes back, and he's like, one of my church members' son has been killed in a car accident. And I'm like, oh no. And the kid lives in Buffalo, Missouri, right? And so he had to drive out there and back yesterday to do the funeral. It was a 9-hour drive, right? It took him 9 hours. It was 4.5 there and 4.5 back. Spent the whole day on Saturday dealing with this funeral. And yesterday, or last week at this time, that was not on either of our schedules, right? It was not on his schedule, so he had to fit that massive thing into, and he's preaching this morning, right? And so those things happen, and all of a sudden our plans change, and it's like this is what you have before you, and all of a sudden everything changes. You guys understand that. You know how life is fragile, and it's very short. Because of that, there's 2 things that we really want to reinforce today. Number one, because of how fragile life is and how short life is, we want to make the most of our life. But what does that really look like, right? What does it really look like to make the most of our life? And the other thing is that we need to make sure that we are fully dependent on God throughout our life, whatever it may look like. So kind of take those 2 questions as our backdrop this morning, and let's dive in and take a look at James chapter 4. We're going to consider verses 13 through 17, and if your Bible has subheadings in it like mine does, it says boasting about tomorrow, right? And you guys probably know this. It says, now listen, You who say, today or tomorrow we'll go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, make money. Why? Well, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes, and all such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. First, the brevity of life. James speaks to the brevity of life. He refers to our lives as a mist. And Vanessa Price had this in her purse this morning, and it worked out just great. Because when James refers to our life as a mist, mist is not like fog, and mist is not like smoke. Mist is like this. Look at this. Now it's gone. Right? It's just that quick. It's just in a moment, we're here, and then we're gone. It doesn't take very long. And so most of us live like we're going to live forever, right? And here's some good advice, okay? I'm just going to give you some godly wisdom. It's important to plan because you have some parameters that God has given us, right? And so within those parameters, we need to plan for that. And I'm just going to tell you, I plan to live to 100. Right? I don't have any plans beyond that, Steve, because I don't know very many people who have, and the ones who do, somebody else takes care of them. Right? I've never seen anybody that's over 100 going, I got nothing here to take. Somebody takes care of everybody who makes it to over 100. Somebody takes care of them, so I'm not going to plan to that. But I am going to plan to that. Why? Because I might. And it would be imprudent for me to not have some form of a plan to take care of me until then. This may be it for me. Today may be it. I don't know, but I could live to 100, so I'm going to have a plan for that. Right? I'm going to have some form of a plan to say, well, if I do, then this is what I'm going to do. If God says, I want you to be on this earth till you're 100 years old or a little more, I don't know anybody that's 125 that's out here working. Right? Do you? We don't get that. Okay? That the two things tells us that. The Bible tells us that, and also life tells us that. We just don't know anybody. It just doesn't happen. It's the human thing. And so that's what happens. So we're not going to live forever. It's going to be short. But here's the other side of that. I'm not going to live my life in such a way that I'm going to be gone tomorrow either, and that I fully expect that to happen. And then if it doesn't, then I don't have anything. That's also unwise. Right? It does leverage into our lives a little bit, right? And I've lived that because Troy and I have shared the ministry together since 2005. He came to teach ag with me when Mr. Shown was called to active duty, and I knew Troy in high school, and I knew Troy after high school, but he and I were really not close friends. Our friendship was rekindled on a particular day 25 years ago, and I was reminded of that this week. And I didn't have this in my notes, but I shared it in the first service, and I want to share it with you guys because I think it has some weight. 25 years ago, one of my former students, or two of my former students, Stephanie and Jeremy Brown, got married. Right? They celebrated their 25th anniversary this week. And on that wedding at Concord Church, Troy was the pastor at Concord, and Stephanie and Jeremy asked me to do the wedding, and they asked Troy to sing because he was the pastor of the church at the time. On the evening before their wedding, on Friday evening, I'm at Concord doing the wedding rehearsal, and he, as normal, was late, and I, as normal, was late. And so I don't know when we started, but we eventually got there, right? And so he came in, and I had really not had a conversation with him much since high school, and probably not a whole lot then because we just weren't close. I knew who he was. He knew who I was. That was it. And so, but now we're in the ministry. We share this common ground. And so he comes in, and we do the rehearsal, and we're having a rehearsal dinner in the basement. And he looks at me, and I said, how's it going? How's life treating you? How's everything going? And he said, well, today's been rough. I said, well, tell me, what's going on? What's happened? He said, my dad found out today that he has pancreatic cancer, and they've given him 6 months to live. And I said, my gosh, I said, how old is your dad? He said, he's 55. All right, so do the math. 25 years ago, right? And he said, I don't know that I'm ready for this. And I said, well, none of us are. And so we talked about it a little bit, and then he left, and then we did the wedding the next day, and then I didn't see him until it was 2005, which was a few years later. And when I reacquainted with him, and he told me the story of how this unfolded, and I watch to see how he lives his life very differently in the thought process than I do, okay? And here's why. His dad got sick, and he started doing treatments, and his dad worked as an accountant. And his dad was in the hospital at Vanderbilt taking treatments, and Troy was down there, and he was with him in the hospital room, and his dad was actually sitting in the bed with a laptop computer and a phone, right? And he is on the phone with people doing work on the computer, right? And so he's answering phone calls just as if he was in the office, and so he's answering. This was back before we did remote work, right? There was no internet. He's just there answering the phone. He's doing this thing. And so he's calling people, and he's doing stuff, and he's doing, and Troy's sitting there watching him do this, and he's like, he said, I'm just going to go home for a little while, get some rest. And he said, then I'll come back and check on you. And his dad's like, okay, sure, that's fine, go ahead. And so he said, I left and I went out and I got my car and I'm driving out of Vanderbilt, coming out of Nashville. And he said, all of a sudden I felt this heaviness, just this intense heaviness on my heart. And it was like, you need to go back. He said, so I stopped the car, turned around, went back to the hospital, go back in. He said, I walked back in the hospital room, and there's Dad, and he's on the phone, and he's still doing his thing. And I just sat down. He looked at me. He said, so what, did you forget something? He said, no, I just felt like I needed to come back. Okay. And so he sat down in the chair, and his dad was like, well, okay, good. I need to go to the bathroom. So he gets up out of bed. He goes to the bathroom. He comes out of the bathroom. He looks at Troy, and he said, something's wrong. And he just falls over, and Troy catches him, and he's gone. He had an embolism. And it was part of the side effects of the treatments that he was taking, and he just died. You look at it, and it was probably a grace given because of the intense suffering that he and I both have witnessed from people who die from pancreatic cancer, and so, but it still happened very suddenly, very quickly, and he was not mentally, none of us would be prepared for that. But here's the moral of that story: his dad was 55. Okay, that's how old he and I are, right? We're both 56 now. And so from that point, when he came, that night that he came and he and I were in the basement of Concord Church talking about this, he went outside and he was in his car and he was crying out to God. He was like, Lord, he said, the hardest thing about this, trying to process this, he said, is that I talk to my dad every day. I bounce everything off of him. He said, I don't know who in the world I'm going to have to talk to when he has to go. Okay, he had just had a conversation with me. He walked out and he asked that question of God. And so he put us together. And we've been together for 20 years in ministry, just every day. Just about every day we talk. And so when I look at him, we were talking last night, and he was driving back. And I was thinking about this message, thinking about the brevity of life. And he said, he said, I'm 56. And he said, I did not expect to be here. He said, I fully expected that I would be dead now because his dad is gone. That's my dad. He's 81. He's in better shape than I am, okay? He works harder than I do. And it never entered my mind, right? That's not something I sit and think about, but it's something that because that was his experience, right? His experience was that happened. It came out of nowhere, a diagnosis, and then 6 months later, his dad was gone. And so that enters into every decision that he makes. Everything that he does, he thinks about that every single day, that can happen. And then, so there you are, and then here it is. It can happen to me too. It hasn't, but it can. And so when those things come to us and we begin to think about that, we have plans that we make, but we have to include him. Look at this. Jesus taught on this in a parable. In Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21, the subheading in my Bible says, the parable of the rich fool. You've read this, you've heard this, right? Let's look at verse 13. It says, someone in the crowd said to him, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. And Jesus replied, Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? Then he said, Watch out. You better be on guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, well, what am I going to do? I have no place to store my crops. I know what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns. I'll build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain, and I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Just take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you've prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. Folks, the key is balance. All right? The key is balance. We don't know how long we get, right? But we should plan for what we should expect. And then we have a plan, but all of those plans that we have need to include God first. It always has to be about God first. And if we put Him first in all of our decisions, our financial decisions, our family decisions, our time decisions, all of those decisions, if we put Him first, then we have balance. We should plan for the future, but trust God fully in the moment. And just because we have an example before us doesn't mean that we have to center our life around that example, right? Just because somebody is gone at a certain age in our life, we don't look at them and say, well, because it goes both ways, right? My great-grandmother was 94 when she left us. I fully expected to have my grandmother until she was 94. She made it to 84. She went 10 years earlier. My great-grandmother fully had her mind. My grandma struggled with Alzheimer's in her last few years. We don't know. We can't look at one person and say, well, that's what's going to happen to this person. That's what's going to happen to me. It may be even, it doesn't matter. That's God's plan. Okay? That's God's plan. We don't just, I've seen so many examples, right? I've seen so many people who've lost parents at much younger ages than I am, but they live differently. The key is balance. What is your plan if you live to 100? What's your plan if you leave today? How does that look? The point that Jesus is making with this parable is that you can't invest in your retirement and not take into consideration what you're going to give to the kingdom, right? Leaving something for the kingdom and allowing your life to live on in the possessions that you have. When the parable of the rich fool said, hey, I'm just going to take all the money that I have, I'm just going to store it all up, and then I'm going to party the rest of the time, right? That's not a good plan. That's not a good plan. It doesn't work out that way always, right? The brevity of life, and the second thing that we look at this morning is the pride of man. Let's look at James 4:13 again, because there's a lot of prideful statements in this. It says, now listen, you who say, he says, listen to these people, this is what you say. I hear you saying, today or tomorrow we're going to go to this city, we're going to go there, we're going to do this, we're going to carry on business, we're going to make money. Do you see all those statements there? There's a whole lot of I in that, right? There's a whole lot of this is what I am going to do. This is what I'm going to do. This is my 34th year teaching ag. For those of you who don't know, in the state of Kentucky, if you started back when I started, when you get to 27 years, you can retire with benefits and not be deducted, right? And so that's the first window that we have is at 27 years. And so when you get to this place, I know how it is, all right? Every university that's out there that has an ag program with young student teachers, my name gets written on the board. This old bird's going to go sometime, and so there'll be a job opening there, right? So all of us, they write us all down. And so when we're around those people, when we're in those circles, when I go to state fair, when I go to teachers conference, when I go to camp, it's inevitable when I run into somebody in my circle of ag teaching, I get the same question. How much longer? When are you going to go? How long are you going to do it? How long? They ask me everywhere I go. My buddy Jason Smith has been teaching ag for 33 years over at Davis County High School. I saw Smitty at State Fair, and I walked up behind him and said, hey, Smitty, how much longer are you going to go? You get tired of hearing that? And he's like, I hear it everywhere I go. I don't know the answer. God does. Do I have a plan? Yeah, I have a plan. I absolutely have a plan. God's right in the middle of that plan, right? I seek and consult Him every single time because I know that what my plan is, I may get one of those phone calls or I may wake up with one of those in the morning, right? And then it's over. My plan has to do with God's plan. It has to do with the health of my family and the people that are around me. I really don't know. I have a plan, but it's not my plan. It's a plan that the Lord revealed to me. I fully believe that if I stop short based on my desire to have fun, would be unwise. I also believe that to stay too long is also unwise. I have a good friend, or had a good friend, who was he was a pastor of a church in West Kentucky, and he taught ag for over 40 years. And his last day teaching ag, he had a stroke at the North American Livestock Show. And when I talked to his wife, who's still living, the last time I was with her, we were in Rupp Arena at her grandson's retiring thing for state office. And I looked at her and I said, Pat, I said, how long did Harold do this? And she just looked at me with eyes that tell a story. And she said, he stayed too long. She said, don't make that mistake. She said, he tried to go too long. And she said, he should have stepped away before he did. And I said, that's wise words to somebody that's in my position. And I hear you. I hear you. And she shared more with me about the end of his career. He didn't pass away from that. He was given more time. But I remember this. His son and I are the same age. And Michael just stepped away from his teaching career in April. And I also, when I talked to Michael about it, I said, so what decisions do you make? He said, I'm going to tell you this. He said, when my dad was dying of cancer, he said he individually called each one of his grandchildren and his children to his bed and apologized to them because he stayed too long. He said, so don't do that. He said, don't put yourself in that position. He said, because he enjoyed the time that he had with them at the end so much that he saw where he could have had a little more and that it would have been wise to have taken that. And I said, all right, I hear you. Get what I'm trying to say to you. There are people who have the ability to give you wisdom. Godly people that are in your lives, because Harold did it both ways. He pastored a church and he taught ag for over 40 years. And so when you have somebody that's in your life like that, you lean into them for the wisdom that they can share with you. You need to seek what God's plan is for your life according to that. Be careful if your calendar is too busy to fit God into it, because He has a way of rearranging your calendar, okay? When God chose a people, when He chose the people of Israel to be His people, and He led them out of Egypt, and then He began to establish a nation with them. Think about this for a moment. We don't study this extensively. Maybe we should. But remember all the festivals that He put in place, that they would come? And there were 7 festivals, I believe, and the 4 of them, they were required to come to Jerusalem. Why would He do that? If He didn't put it on their calendar, they'd fill it up with something else. If God didn't say, you have to do this in order to worship me and to be my people and I want to be your God, then you've got to put me on your schedule. And so here it is. If you can go back and read the whole Old Testament, go through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, it's all in there. At this time, at this stage of the moon, we do all these things, right? And we celebrate these things. We celebrate these festivals because God said, I'm important and I want your obedience and I want you to put me on your calendar. Listen, if you're a Christian, you don't have to stop working. You don't have to stop doing what you do. You just need to rearrange your calendar and put God first. When you put God on your calendar and say, we're going to do this is what we're going to do. We're going to put Him first and then everything else is going to fill in. Then you got the priority straight, right? That's what He asked for. Because when we think we can fill our calendar and not put God into it, He's standing there looking at it and going, I can rearrange your calendar, right? I can rearrange your calendar. I've watched it happen over and over again. I have a good friend who taught ag at Hopkins County Central, and I've been planning to go fishing with Lee. Lee loves to fish. He loves to hunt, and he fishes all the time down on Lake Barkley. And we've talked a few times about it. And I remember when he got he's younger than I am. He just retired 2 years ago with 27 years, and he's younger than me. And so he started, and man, every time I look on Facebook, he's out there with another bass, right? He's out there fishing, catching all these fish, and it's just, I'm loving it for him. And he's spending more time with his kids. He's spending more time with his family, and he's just out there doing this. And then a couple of weeks ago, I got a text from one of my friends who's also a pastor and an ag teacher, was his co-teacher, and he's like, hey, something going on with Lee. I was like, what's wrong with Lee? And he started noticing that he couldn't calculate math. When he would go to a restaurant and try to figure a tip, he couldn't look at a number and then in his head calculate a percentage and do the math, which he had always been able to do, but he was unable to do that. he was like, that's just weird. Every time I try to do that, I just can't. And then he started noticing balance issues. He's like, I'm not able to, okay. Long story short, he went to the doctor. He had some tests. This week on Wednesday, he underwent surgery at MD Anderson in Houston for brain cancer, right? And we're all praying for Lee, and Lee's he's a Christian man. He loves the Lord. And so he had a plan, but this was not on his plan. All right, that was not on his plan. 2 years ago, when he got his watch and was retiring at 27 years, his plan consisted of lots of fishing trips, lots of good time, lots of fun. Brain cancer was not on the list. All right, it was not on the list, but it's very much on the list now. Another good friend, Troy Good. Troy taught ag at Hopkins County High School. My first real experience with Troy, I had been to FFA camp, sat around and talked with him. But one morning I'm coming downstairs in the golf house and I get off the elevator and I'm driving out to Seneca High School for a day of workshops, and Troy's sitting there in a chair, one of the big wingback chairs in the lobby of the golf house, and he's like, "Hey, are you heading down to Seneca?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Good, I'll be riding with you." I said, "Come on, hop in, brother." And so he gets in the van with me, and we drive over to Seneca. Had the best conversation about cattle. He's a cattle farmer, has 2 kids, has 3 kids actually. And so we were talking about life and all these things. And then from that time forward, every time we would camp together or be in an FFA circle, we would have extensive He started preaching. Felt the call of the ministry, and then he retired at 27 years, started pastoring churches in Christian County, and he was actually a big horse guy, a big rodeo guy. So he was actually one of the chaplains at down in at the Wranglers campground, and so he would work down there, and he would have cowboy church. He would lead cowboy church down at Wranglers a lot. And Troy was driving his tractor, doing some bush hogging, and his heart exploded. He had a massive heart attack and died on the tractor. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. I got the call when I was in the airport at New Orleans, coming home from an ag conference. And Benji Kilgore called me and he said, "Hey, you ain't gonna believe this, but Troy's dead." And I was like, "What the heck? How can that be? That's not on my list." He just retired. He said, "Yeah, he'd just taken a job, going back to school teaching math." I was like, "What?" And it's just, there it is. He has twin daughters. Maggie is just a fantastic young lady. She works for H&R AgriPower in marketing. Her twin sister or twin brother is at Auburn in vet school. And that was not on any of their list of things that they were going to encounter, right? That was just out of the blue. I can go on and on and on of examples of that. The important thing is that we have to be aware that our life is not guaranteed to us, right? We don't have the promise of tomorrow. I have a list of guys here. Robert Parrish, I taught with for 9 years. Robert had a pulmonary embolism after he had a back injury and just died at his kitchen table. Wes York was a good friend of mine, taught ag at Caldwell County High School. Wes gave his daughter away at their wedding right there at around Thanksgiving. About the same time that we lost Troy Good, Wes had knee replacement surgery. While he was in the hospital, right after knee replacement surgery, contracted COVID, and his lungs shut down. He went to Nashville. He was in the hospital for like 6 months. I went down to see him. He never got out of the hospital. My good friend Chris Beliles, one of my first students, that was my first FFA president 34 years ago. Dr. Chris Beliles. He was an optometrist at the Walmart in Paducah, and I would go down and go fishing with Chris at the lake. And Chris had a bad headache one night, and he went into the bathroom to get some Tylenol and just fell dead on the floor from a brain aneurysm. It just happens. These are people that I love. These are people that I'm friends with. These are people that I knew. Don Kidd told me at the end of last service, he said, "Hey, I don't want to be that close to you." Okay? And he said, "I really don't know if I want to be good friends with you or not," right? There are people in this room that I know your story. All right? I know your story. You've lost spouses. You've gone through and battled cancer. Things that were not on your planner, right? Things that were not in your calendar. We all have it. We all have it. None of us know if we get another day. Okay, that's the truth. None of us know if we get another day. So don't put off today to do something that you know that you don't know that you're going to get. All right? We say, I'll see you tomorrow a lot, but we don't know if we will or not this side of eternity. Instead, we need to remember that God gives us the gift of life. And so each day when we get up, we live it that way. Right? We live it because we've been given it. And so I'm not saying that we go out and just take all the money that we have and just start jumping out of airplanes and doing wild and crazy, because that's not what he calls us to do. That's living unwise. Right? Because at that point we're saying, I know I'm not going to be here in a few days, and so because I know I'm not going to be here in a few days, I'm going to use everything up that I have, every resource that I have, and then what are you going to do if you are here? So that's not the way we live. That's not what it is. What does it look like to live every day like it is your last? I want to challenge you that it shouldn't look like a party. Right? It shouldn't look like a party. It should look more like obedience. It should look more like obedience. If you're going to live every day like it's your last, then that day should be lived in such a way that your children would look at you and go, he was doing what he was supposed to do. Right? He was doing what he was supposed to do. If something happens to me on the way to school or the way home from school or at home before I even leave to go to school, don't say, well, that's so sad. He should have retired in 2019 because he could have went fishing more. That's crazy. That's crazy. Doesn't make any sense to me, right? You just look and say, well, he did what he felt like God wanted him to do, and then God called him home, and that's what it is. And he made a plan to be here till he was 100, but it didn't work. That's not what God's plan was. It's all about what he wants for us. And so our life should look like we're being obedient to him. And we do that every day. We should integrate everything in. We need rest. There's times that I just kind of want to shut down and go fishing. Sometimes I just like to travel. I had a nice vacation this summer, just enjoyed my time. I just went and sat and watched the world pass by for a few days. We need that. Right? We need that. I don't need it every day. I don't need 365 days of sitting in a chair watching the world go by. I don't need that. I need to work. I need to do things. I need to make a difference in the world while God has me here. So we integrate rest. We integrate hard work. We work hard. We play hard. Right? We enjoy what we have. But most importantly, we include God in every decision. And so in closing, it's simply this. What decision do you need to make today? If you don't, I'm not saying that you go and jump out of an airplane or that you go and just because you don't know that if you're going to be here tomorrow. What I'm really saying is that, is there someone you need to talk to? Is there someone that you need to say, I'm sorry? Is there someone that you need to make reconciliation with? Is there somebody that you need to make something right with that you don't need to let that go? Right? And here's the most important thing. Do you need to say yes to the relationship that God is offering you? Because you can come to this message today with two different sets of ears, right? One set of ears comes and says, okay, I don't need to live wild and crazy. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I'm going to have a good solid plan that I've sought God's wisdom out. I'm going to put God on my calendar first. And then everything else is going to be added in. That's wise. That's a wise way to do things. I'm going to look and see what I can do to build up the kingdom of God. Any wealth that I have accumulated, what kind of a plan do I have for that so that it helps the kingdom of God if I happen to not be here tomorrow? I'm going to make those plans. I'm going to look at those things. I'm going to do that. But if you're not saved, if you don't know Christ, if you've never said yes to the relationship that he offers, then it's more critical. Okay? Because if you know, and you know. You know if you know. You know if you're saved. You know if you've said yes. You know if God's not priority, and if you're saying, well, if you're in that place where you're like, I'm going to put that off until an easier time or a better time or whatever, you know that that's you. And you've never said yes to the relationship that he offers. Now's the time. Okay? Now's the time to do it. He's given you this moment. You're here, I'm here, we're all here. And you need to make him first in your life. Right? Don't put that decision off to another time because you do not know if you have it, but you have it now. So use it. Let me pray for us. Father, we love you.